the spotlight scanner, the spotlight studio, in which photo cells take the place of lights, and the telecine projection room with the projector in course of erection.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at Alexander Palace. And now we're going to see and hear someone you know well. It's Helen Mackay. Looking at you from out of the blue. Don't take a path, but settle down and look it up.
But for the Baird Company, the show was over as far as the BBC was concerned when, in 1937, they settled for their rivals, Marconi EMI's electronic system. Ray Herbert, Margaret Baird, and engineer J.D. Percy.
Everyone at Alexander Palace was very kind while we were fighting and losing Baird's last battle. However, there was no stopping the advance of the flickerless, tireless, inertialess electron camera. So sadly, we pulled out the Baird circuit breakers for the last time, turned off the taps on the old intermediate film, carefully disposed of the chemicals, and went home.
He stuck to his mechanical system. This was the trouble, that he tried to weather every storm, more or less, on his own, because he had been the first person to get a working television picture. And it became an obsession with him. He probably was the last of the men who worked in attics, and he struggled along alone.
And some people at the time, writing in magazines, indicated that that was more or less the end of the Baird Company. In fact, someone used the expression exit Baird. But this was not really fair, because they made very good telecine machines, which were supplied to the BBC for many, many years, and I believe still are. And Baird was working in his private laboratory to very good effect. He produced, as has been mentioned, very good colour pictures. And the company went on to produce accessories for the television industry. So they were still functioning, still under the name of Baird Television, until the war, when, for reasons which really haven't been fully explained, Baird Television Limited went into voluntary liquidation and emerged overnight as Cinema Television, but without Baird. His contract wasn't renewed, and he was a free agent and decided to continue with his colour work at his private laboratory with a staff of about 3 people, paying them out of his own pocket. And in 1940, he produced 600-line colour pictures. In 1941, he produced stereoscopic television pictures in colour. And for those people who say that Baird never made any contribution to present-day television, there you have the answer, because we still have not got colour stereoscopic pictures.
Well, we have now. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, having immense troubles with the YouTube live stream, halted frames, dropped frames, and eventually the previous stream came to a complete halt. I've been trying to follow Steve 3SL's lead by integrating OBS camera software with the YouTube stream. Have had absolutely no success with it. If anybody can help me connect the two, I'd be most appreciative, because connecting a webcam direct to the stream, at least with my 3 computers that I've now tried, is only partly successful. So I've restarted the system and the stream, but sadly, if we can't improve things, I'm going to drop the idea of continuing on YouTube and start work on a shortwave version of our transmission to run parallel with the VHF to take us interstate on at least 80 metres. The frustrations of trying to run YouTube live when it's so unreliable are really too great. However, I'll finish this documentary in the next 4 minutes, and then we're coming up at 11 p.m. for a discussion on 147.475. I've been listening off air, and the old ham radio seems to be absolutely reliable, never misses a beat. But the computers, what can you say? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, back to the documentary, just finishing it off on John Logie Baird and the invention of television.
Ray Herbert. Busy with his own work during the Second World War, Baird's health was declining. His son and daughter remember the time they spent with him towards the end of his life.
I never saw him lose his temper. I think there were occasions elsewhere when he did blow up, but he never did it with the family. He was always soft-spoken and easygoing. And he tried to get me interested in science. I remember he introduced me to what a lens would do. You know, he would show how you can get an image with a magnifying glass if you hold it up against the wall.
Well, I remember him coming into my grandmother's. I used to use the hut in the garden for playing and showing me how to mix paints and trying to explain about optics, you know, the different colours you could get with mixed paints. And he bought me a magnifying glass and showed me how to set things on fire from the sun. You know, we had quite a lot of fun. He had a very dry sense of humour. He used to quote Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear. He was very fond of them. I used to think he'd made these poems up, but I came across them later. But he did write a series of stories about Izzy and Dizzy and Flossie Flannelfeet when he was in London. They were a family of flies, and they had a dreadful time in boarding houses, which was probably a reflection of his awful life in boarding houses, you know. My last memories of him are him lying in bed, surrounded by electric fires and endless wires coming from the central power point, because in those days you didn't have nearly enough wall plugs. You know, it was electric blankets, and God knows what, everything coming from the... We were quite well off, but people just didn't have wall plugs, you know. Him trying to run his business by phone from his bed.
After the war, we all went to live in Bexhill, and at this point his health really began to break down. He spent more and more time in his bed. He wasn't able to travel up to London, but he did keep closely in touch by telephone, and the Baird Television Company was getting started again after the war. They were making receivers, and they were also exploring the possibility of television links to cinemas. The Victory Parade in June 1946 was televised not only by the BBC, but independently by the Baird Company, which had links to 3 of the London cinemas. My father was directing this operation by telephone from his bedside. And finally, he died quite unexpectedly. I mean, we knew he was ill, but he just died overnight on June the 14th, 1946.
John Logie Baird died just as his groundbreaking work in colour and 3D television was about to be recognised. And who knows what he might have achieved with the backing of a big organisation and better health. The great debate as to who invented television will rage on, and it can be argued that no one person truly invented it. What it took was a man with vision to piece together all the technology and create a true television picture. And that is exactly what John Logie Baird did.
And that documentary on John Logie Baird and the invention of television was put together by the BBC about 30 years ago. Many of the protagonists in that, Tony Bridgewater, Ben Clapp, Malcolm Baird, Ray Herbert, I knew personally and had a correspondence with. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. It's now 11 p.m. and I hope to open this up now for a discussion on 147.475. If you want to look in, I've restarted the stream. I don't know how long it'll hold up before it starts to go unreliable again. I cannot get it to work properly with webcam connected directly to YouTube Live. I'm told by Steve 3SL it can be done with OBS software intermediate between the webcam and YouTube Live, but for some reason my computer just will not permit it. So, with that being said, we'll concentrate now on, I suppose you'd call it a callback. He said, looking for a pen, finding a logbook. Have we got any listeners out there to have a chat now? This is VK3AML putting out a CQ call on 147.475.
This is the one where he says if it doesn't work, it's probably because it's digital. I find that with quite a lot of things, and often analog solutions do actually work better, in my experience. Yes, and that documentary was most entertaining. I don't know whether it's possible to get a copy or whether it's on the net there. Yes, 3AML egg.
It's on the net, but I downloaded it so long ago, I don't know exactly where. I could probably email it to you. I'd transfer it to MP3 or whatever. So we've got VK3EGG. We got any other people out there for the callback? VK3AML.
3ACZ. And VK3ECG.
Hello, VK3ACZ and VK3ECG. I know that 3ECG was looking in and seeing all of the problems with halts and buffer underrun and whatnot. I suspect it's due to something within YouTube Live which can be adjusted from a tab under one of the hundreds of permutations and combinations of tabs that one can go through. You go underneath one tab, you find 10 alternatives. Under each of those, there are 10 more. One needs a PhD in computer science to navigate it. Anyway, VK3ACZ, Peter, nice to see you there, as usual, and looking forward to the 7th for the meeting of the Sherbrooke Radio Club, if they can get it around the pandemic. VK3ACZ to take, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ, and acknowledging John, EGG, and David, ECG. Well, I didn't bother with the streaming tonight. When you said that you're having trouble with it, I thought, I won't, but I concentrated very hard on it. First thing, the pandemic broadcast. Boy, you remind me again, I used to sit in nursing class in the 70s, and we talked about the possibility of a pandemic, and my eyes used to glaze over, and yeah, sure, that'll happen. Hi. Anyway, so here we are. And personal thoughts about the lockup notwithstanding. It was lovely for you to have chosen the broadcast. You did that podcast from the BBC on the subject. I'd forgotten that it was 50 million, the suspected list of terminal casualties from it all. We think we're doing it tough now, but oh boy. Now, John Logie Baird, a few little comments to make there. Interesting that I believe our Logies are named after him. It was terrific that you had so much about the personal side of the guy. He was obviously a genius. I'm glad the broadcast wasn't heavy-handed. It suggested that it was all his baby. You know, there's some dispute about it, and a lot of people influenced the whole thing. But, you know, I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like for him now. I think he died in 46, didn't he? Wonder what it'd be like for him to come back today and see our high-definition TVs, you know, where you can, those huge screen things now where you can see every blade of grass on the football field and recognise the faces of the people in the crowd and all that. He'd be absolutely stunned, I'm sure, about it all. I had a bit of... I also didn't know that the experiments went back to 1925. I thought it was just before the Second World War, so I was really... having my ignorance rectified and cured about that subject. And I had a bit of a smile when you suggested kidnapping 3SL. I was listening to his broadcast last night as well, and that would be, I'd almost pay to see that. Hi. But anyway, as always, thank you for a very informative broadcast, and look forward to talking a bit more about it. But I'll put it back to you there, Chris. Thank you very much. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML. John Young on the YouTube Live chat box has mention, touch wood, he says it's working, but it seems to work for the first hour okay, and then it gradually falls apart. I don't know what's going on, whether there's some buffer underrun problem that's cumulative, whether that can be adjusted. It really takes somebody expert. And John 3GG, I wouldn't agree that just because it's digital, it's unreliable. It's more the operator that's unreliable because he doesn't know the full implications of what he's doing. These days, so many of these digital applications are so specialised and so finely designed on so many different levels that I doubt whether any one engineer has an overview of the whole damn project. And that applies to many aspects of computer technology: the design of a motherboard, the audio, the video, the processing, the central processing unit. Does anybody now have sufficient knowledge to cover a real working knowledge of not only what programming is going on, but what exactly is going on with the hardware? I think a lot of it is suck it and see. And I'm amused quite often by the fact that the best way to cure a problem is simply to switch the whole computer off and switch it on again. And I was amazed when a friend of mine who was a computer engineer used that very tactic when he couldn't work out what was going on. As I have tonight, I stopped the stream completely, dropped it, and restarted the stream after restarting the program. And for the moment, it seems okay, but it's just not reliable. So I'll just have to work out where Steve has got the OBS software program working. So we go round to VK3CG. And how are you tonight? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima.
Yes, good evening, Chris, and good evening, John and Peter. Yes, it's been very annoying, hasn't it? I mean, when you started it, it seems to be working now. I just quickly checked. But these sort of interlinked systems are really very tedious, I know. The only other option, of course, is to run it on a mobile device like an iOS device and set that up in the background, because that might work a little bit more easily, because it's sort of geared up, I suppose, with iOS, where you have far fewer options to make changes, and maybe that would have some advantages. But obviously, with the computer all set up anyway, it seems silly to be using a mobile phone in a studio setting like that. But yes, fascinating on both the pandemic front and also on Baird. I was fascinated about him being in Hastings. It's a part of the world that I know well, and Bexhill, and I know that shopping arcade and so on. So it's a really interesting area, and I think one of the wards, one of the little sort of suburb areas of Hastings is called Baird. Whether it relates to him or not, I don't know, but I suspect it may well do, which is interesting. But my in-laws lived in Bexhill, and we used to go to Hastings a lot when I was in the UK. As for the issues of the pandemic, well, yes, things come around, and reality is that they've probably always been with us. And the interrelationship with, birds, certainly with influenza being primarily an avian disease, which overlaps into swine and so on, all the different virus types, and the H1N1 and the H1N5 and all the other H5N1, whatever it is, and there's a whole variety of them, and they all have similar effects. But it seems to be that some of the issues that were happening with COVID, that was causing so many of the COVID problems, probably was a feature of that particular strain of influenza A. That is, it created a cytokine storm in the young people, and again, making younger adults more vulnerable, probably because of an enhanced sort of immune system compared to the elderly and young, which of course what most influenzas tend to hit. But it appears that the 1918 Spanish flu
Okay, Dave. Thanks. And before we hand it back to Mr. Egg, do we have any other breakers who'd like to join the group? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. I didn't hear anybody there. Did anybody else hear a comeback?
No, I didn't, Chris.
No. Okay. Looks like we've got 3, which is enough for 1 week. Yeah, Mr. Egg, it's frustrating, but I'm just getting used to this YouTube streaming. I have pretty good coverage via VHF, not as good as you probably have up on the hill there, but it's enough to get me around town and out to about between 50 and 100 kilometres in most directions. I'm in a reasonably high spot in the eastern suburbs, about 110 metres above sea level, with a good high mast at the back of the property. But looking at the Annan as my next step in HF, we've got a bit of an unexpected bequest, which will allow allow us to consider a few luxuries on which we can build, and the Annan is a good one. Along with that, I've acquired some valves, which the people on the stream, I think there are 7 on the stream, will be able to see. Transmitting valves, the Philips YL1150, which I'll hold up to the camera like that. The YL1150, which is rather like a slightly lower frequency version of the 640 on steroids, capable of the full legal limit of AM on 1 tube, although to do it comfortably I'd use 2. It's also a low impedance tube like the 640, fairly hefty filament, runs I think no higher than 600 or 700 volts. But for that it can pass quite a bit of amperage, I think 300 milliamps maximum. So I'm hoping for that, for some sort of linear amplifier, or perhaps just a Class C stage and run it in AM. I have sufficient gear around here for AM. But I'll try to develop the digital stream if I can find somebody sufficiently expert in streaming, perhaps 3SL, perhaps somebody else, who can set up OBS software as an intermediary to YouTube Live. It'll be good. I believe the OBS software has all sorts of refinements that make possible, for example, if your sound drifts out of sync with the audio, the OBS software can displace the sound either ahead of or behind the latent video software stream. It also has variable buffering, which YouTube, just on its basic level that I'm using at the moment, apparently doesn't, not unless it's on some tab I haven't discovered yet. But certainly it's interesting running the YouTube live stream. I would love to be able to drop in stills to illustrate what I'm talking about or what's being talked about on the recordings. But again, all I can run at the moment with the unenhanced YouTube software is just the webcam. And so I've put it up with a fairly wide view of the Radio Shack here. If people want to look in, just out of curiosity, look for VK3AML 29 May 2021, Part 2, Pt.2. I've had to restart the stream and I can't use the original name again, unfortunately. So, Mr. Egg, presuming you're still there, for any comments, VK3GG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, 3AML, VK3GG. Yeah, fine, all that. Yes, well, I do remember Mr. Branch, when he was still alive, was reviewing crows because Cyro were going to buy some new crows. Anyway, he rejected most of them because they were digital with 500,000 hidden menus that no one would learn. And he wanted a crow like your normal crow where you do your electronics and you twiddle the knobs and you get it to lock up and it's all there in front of you on the front panel of the crow like a normal crow is. So he went through all these crows he rejected for that very reason. He said, if you're meant to be doing a job doing electronics, you haven't got time to be searching through 1,000,001 hidden menus to make the crow work when a normal crow doesn't have that problem. Yeah, talking of 640s on steroids, there was a really big 640, I've forgotten its number, for television broadcasting. It had 2 top caps that were hollow per anode, so that water could flow through the anodes. It ran many kilowatts, and it was a VHF high-power push-pull transmitting valve. I've just forgotten its number, but it's the biggest valve of that architecture that I've seen. Yes, England. Well, half my family come from England, but unfortunately I've never been to England. Because half of them were the Gwent confectionery factory in Newport. And of course, as we know, the other half were the Colders of the Calder Highway and the Braithwaite to the Braithwaite Tannery, which is now Preston Market. But yes, pretty interesting little bit of history there. But yes, it would be interesting to go to England one day and have a look at quite a lot of things I could think of to look at in England, but I don't think I'm going to afford it at the rate things are going. Anyway, I was going to say something else. I can't. Oh yes, that radio club. Then I might even drop in there one day and see what it's like because that radio is not that far away. I usually have something else on Monday night, but I think the club thing was going to start at 7:30, wasn't it? So, or was it earlier? I forget. Anyway, VK3GG bye.
Any other breakers for the group, VK3AML? No, looks like nobody else. Yeah, Peter can tell you more, 3ACZ. He was the guy that invited me to the first meeting I went to. Up to last month, they were meeting at the Ferntree Gully Scout Hall, a little bit back towards the city from you. It was walkable from Ferntree Gully Station, but it was a good stiff walk of about 15 or 20 minutes. They're moving to a church hall in Baronia this coming month on the 7th of June, I think. 7th of June. And I was looking at the date and thinking, gee, that's very close to the end of the shut-in for the pandemic. At the moment, none of us can legally travel more than 5 kilometres as a result of the pandemic shut-in. And, it's the Baronia is in the order of 15 or 17 kilometres, so I'll have to watch myself. And the police do patrol around, noting number plates on cars and seeing if they're within their normal legal sphere of travel under these circumstances. I mean, when people get out of so-called quarantine in South Australia and then spread the pandemic through at least 50 hotspots, ranging from Melbourne City right through the northern suburbs. What can you say? I mean, it eventually results in about 20 people being infected and the whole lot of us having a very inconvenient week. Computer jargon. Yes, I agree with you there, John. When I first got into recording using digital equipment, I was amazed that the computer community had replaced all of the common terms used in the recording industry with their own terms. For example, an individual recording or take of a recording is no longer called a cut, it's called a computer file. And, the jargon is just completely different. I also had to familiarize myself with sample rate, bit depth, commonly used sample rates and bit depths, the capabilities of sound cards, the fact that many sound cards in computers have a native sample rate of 48 kilohertz, and all of the other sample rates they claim to have are usually done by conversion software within the computer rather than on the card as a native sample rate. People don't seem to realize that. Maybe changing a little bit as time goes on. And the ridiculous non-standardization of audio sample rates, CDs at 41 kilohertz and all other recording at 48. It seems silly. It's just the audio industry as regards digital recording is ridiculously non-standardized, not only with sample rates and bit depths, but within codecs and the variations of MP3. Hello to Bill Rizos, who's on the YouTube stream, by the way, and I see we've got 8 viewers at the moment. The viewers have come up again since the YouTube stream was working again. I had to completely reload the YouTube stream, Bill, so I hope you're getting it okay now. It was really ground to a halt after about an hour previously. The pandemic and the Logies, yes, the Logies were named by Graham Kennedy, I think, in about 1959 as a tribute to John Logie Baird. But there was, in the 50s and 60s, a great reaction of people against Baird being given any credit for the invention of television, largely coming from people in Britain who were the people put out in the 30s. Because of their social connections, they thought that Baird was a bit of a cheeky upstart, and they tried to reduce the memory of his contributions to television. There are all sorts of things that he contributed that aren't generally remembered. One is that Baird was the inventor of interlaced scanning. That's not generally known. He devised an interlaced scanning disk. It's fairly easy to do by sequencing the spirals of holes on a scanning disk to do it. And he had a number of other innovations. He was the first person that I'm aware of in 1927 to combine synchronizing signals with the video signal, which at that time was pretty clever. AT&T, when they did their television tests in 1927, transmitted a tone to lock a synchronous motor on one frequency. They transmitted the audio on another frequency and the video on a third frequency. And you can imagine how practical that wasn't. So to John Logie Baird, in spite of...
Subject that the others probably won't know about, but I was listening yesterday on 10 metres FM to the 3RHF repeater when Randall was saying a few things about D-Star, or giving his considered experiential opinion on it, and somebody else didn't like it. It was good that you came up there and said your little... But anyway, back to the subject at hand. John, if you look up VK3KID or the Sherbrooke radio, for the subject at hand, John, if you look up VK3KID or the Sherbrooke Radio Club site, it will have the address for the next meeting. It's the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Baronia, and it's 19:30 hours. I strongly doubt whether it'll be happening because we don't know whether we're still going to be in the lockup situation. That's the real reason. It'd be good if we weren't, but we've already missed the club. We're going to run an exam for a couple of candidates today, and that didn't happen for obvious reasons. And well, let's hope that we're not still locked up. And I suppose the one thing I can be grateful for is that we're not in a curfew situation, because I hated that last time. I really didn't cope with it at all. And worse, I was the carer for a lady who, when she pressed her duress alarm in the middle of the night, I had to drive to the next suburb to help her go to the toilet or whatever. And I was worried about running into the constabulary that would shoot first and ask questions later. Even though I had a doctor's letter to permit me to be out and breaking the curfew, it was also unnerving that the streets were completely deserted at that time of day too. One I don't care to replicate. And just wondering about you too, David, still on the subject of pandemics, or if I can refer to you as Professor there, your true handle. I'm thinking that things must be very, very tough in your world at the moment. I can remember what it was like in the 80s with the fear of needle stick injuries with AIDS patients, you know, when AIDS was rearing its ugly head in the world. I can't begin to imagine what things are like now and the stresses involved with barrier procedures and so on and so forth. You probably don't want to elaborate or think about work while you're on radio, but I can't help but wonder about that very subject too. But anyway, back to you there, Chris. VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ.
Leaving a good long break in case anybody else wants to come in. I hope our session tonight helps to break down people being shut in as well. I know that whenever there are shut-in periods, activity on the ham bands increases fairly markedly. I was tuning across HF and noticing quite a bit more shut-in periods. Activity on the ham bands increases fairly markedly. I was tuning across HF and noticing quite a bit more activity on 80 metres than there is normally. Dave, I don't think I know you terribly well. I think I've seen you across the room at old EMDRC meetings in the days when Mike used to be president and I used to be a member as a result. But I'm not sure what you did as a profession. Obviously, Peter knows more than I. I'll hand Dave for comment. VK3 VK3, I suppose ECG might be related to your profession if it's medical. Or electroencephalogram. VK3 ECG in the group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML, VK3 ECG. Yes, well, it's one of those interesting stories, really. When I arrived from the UK and applied for a call sign, I was actually offered ECG and some other sort of mixture of letters, and thought to myself, well, that seems pretty logical for a medical type person to pick the ECG one. I didn't even think about what it meant in Morse at the time, but I still have my UK call, which is G0IWI, although I used to have G8GDE when I got a big license in the UK, which goes back a long time now to the early 70s. I suppose, yes, from the point of view of what Peter's saying, strangely enough, it hasn't really made a big issue for us. I think Peter was commenting a little bit then about the issues around bloodborne infections and so on, and certainly those were a real concern to us. But in reality, I don't think COVID's really been as big an issue for us in my area of practice, because I don't deal in clinical work these days. But certainly for colleagues in hospitals, particularly people working in intensive care and so on, as you've seen all the pictures on television, that really is a very stressful sort of environment when they have absolutely packed ICUs and so on. Of course, we never really got to that in Australia, thank goodness. We were planning for lots of things, but it never really happened at that level. A huge amount of planning and stuff went on, though, which was very challenging at the time to get things just ready for something that might or might not happen, but you couldn't afford not to have all the planning in place. Yes, I mean, it's interesting the sort of way music has changed. I was just, in terms of digital stuff there, Chris, I was thinking about the new spatial audio and lossless audio thing that Apple has just announced for the Apple Music system, which actually has incredibly high bit rates and so on. They're talking about, I suppose, with the increased network traffic and the capacity of networks, you can just start increasing the sampling rates and essentially just having larger and larger files, which just makes everything go just as slow as it was before with the new technology. And I suppose it will be interesting to see what transpires in that. But the other option, instead of hijacking Steve, would be to see whether it's worth putting OBS on a mobile device, or iPad, or iPhone, or something like that, because theoretically that would be a simple solution. But obviously you don't want to. You've got everything on your computer as well, and it'd be far better to just do a direct stream rather than having to go through another device in the background. I can see how that would be very irritating, indeed. In terms of traveling to England, I mean, of course, travel's just stopped all over the place. So I did my first interstate trip a few weeks ago now, and that was the first interstate trip I'd done for something like 18 months or something. That was a sort of semi-work trip, which was just nice to be able to go to an airport and get on a plane, actually. And I don't usually think that's nice when I was doing a lot of it. But I mean, the thought of going to England at the moment just fills me with dread. I mean, even though all my family are there and we chat a lot on various video conference calls and things like that, what they've been through compared to what we've been through is just orders apart in terms of social disruption and so on and so forth. And I think this that general sort of fear that they had, because just so many people were getting infected, and the NHS was clearly suffering as a consequence of that. It certainly is very challenging.
Long before Steve had an interest in ham radio. In fact, I think I may have been one of the people that interested him in the whole game. Glad I did too. He's made a serious contribution to it all, and being one of the people that interested him in the whole game. Glad I did too. He's made a serious contribution to it all. And interestingly, Ken Murray just applied to be a member of my Facebook page today, so he must be listening in either to these streams or whatever. Not sure. That's interesting. I've been on 45 minutes on the new upload of the new connection of YouTube Live, and now it's becoming unstable. The number of people watching looks like it's varying from 5 to 0, but I suspect it's 5 the whole time with buffer underrun or something similar. Got to get around this problem. There must be a way of streaming decent audio on the net. I've only used YouTube Live not because I want the video component at all. At my age, the video component is enough to put people off. It's more that I'm running it because it's an easy way of accessing audio, and I would hope that there's a better way. Zoom and with Zoom, the problem is if you listen carefully to the audio, it's heavily intelligently compressed, which means it's kind of okay for voice, but music is a total dead loss on it. It's not designed for that anyway. It's interesting what happens to music when you put it through a heavy compression codec. You feed in a symphony orchestra, and out comes a single saxophone. It's amazing transposition. Anyway, with that, across to John. John, the menu on the computer, the computer-based crows that the branch was talking about. Well, you've got to remember, the branch died 15 years ago, and the events you're talking about are probably 20 to 25 years ago, and crows, particularly solid-state crows, have made leaps and bounds since. VK3AML and group, VK3AML.
You find that 3ML VK3 EGG. Well, actually, he was making the comments about the crows about a week before he died. But anyway, yes, because that's when he was involved with it up to then. But yes, that's right. But still, I prefer a crow where I just turn the knobs to get what I want. If I'm trying to use a crow as a crow, I don't really want to suddenly be surfing the internet on the screen of the crow for hidden menus to try and find out how to work the thing either. So I tend to use old school crows that are like that. But yes, talking of needle stiction injuries or whatever that someone mentioned, a friend of mine was a cleaner. He had these contracts to clean shopping centres. He's actually an amateur too. I won't mention any names. Anyway, that's exactly what happened to him. He picked up a lump of rubbish and this hypodermic needle stuck in his arm or hand or whatever it did, and he tested positive for HIV. So there we have it. And yes, so he's been on all these this smorgasbord of, yes, all very interesting. So that's part of what I was going to talk about. Yes, and Stephen Bentley built his synthesizer to be more like the modular ones. Built his synthesizer to be more like the modular ones, like the original mode, Moog, depending on which school you come from, how you pronounce it, were made with what looked like mixer channels with all the modules built into them vertically side by side. I remember there was a really big synthesizer in the Conservatorium of Music in Melbourne University, because I used to know a certain Meredith Moon, who was a friend of my father's, and they had Ampex AG 440 half-inch 4 tracks and 8 tracks and all these things there, and this big synthesizer in their, what was it, their music lab or whatever it was called, and found that quite entertaining. Anyway, that's what I can think of to say for the moment, so I'll put it by.
Yeah, no worries, John. VK3GG and group VK3AML. I have just had it reported that the second start of the stream is now becoming unreliable, so I've got to find a way of integrating OBS with this bloody software. It's a pain in the neck, and a few places further south of the equator. Okay, round to Peter, VK3ACZ, and while you've got a number of people listening in on the stream as well as on the air, Peter, it might be an idea to advertise when the next meeting of the Sherbrooke Radio Club is going to be and what sort of stuff they'll be discussing, and a little bit about the club perhaps, VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. Well, Chris, I'm not sure whether I should, because it's still very doubtful whether we will be meeting, but because we'll only be out of the lock-up, oh no, it'll be a weekend, won't it? It's due to be June the 7th at 19:30 hours, and as I said before to John, if anybody wants to look up the Sherbrooke Radio Club's website, Google it, or VK3KID will get you there. There's the location and everything. I think we're having a rather famous guest speaker sooner or later, somebody whose call sign initials are 3AML. I think he's coming along to give us a talk about his grand achievement at Deal Island in Bass Strait. That'll be good. I'm sure we're all looking forward to that, but I don't actually know what's planned for the next one. As I said, my fingers are still crossed that we'll actually be having it. But anyway, I'd like to, go off topic a little bit, but have a quick bellyache about what amateur radio's been doing to me the last couple of days. You know, we're locked up. We can't really go anywhere. One of my great things is to go portable, because I avoid all the QR Mary from dirty inverters, and my neighbours 2 doors down are growing vegetable matter that looks very much like tomatoes but isn't quite, and absolutely destroys a couple of bands in HF. So it's great to go out portable and get away from it. But I was so disappointed today. There's a 15-metre net on, and I looked at the sunspot figures on the QRZ site, and oh beauty, you know, the solar flux index is around about 90 odd, which I've never seen it as, because remember I'm a relatively new ham, so I've just come into the hobby at the bottom of the cycle, so I've got no experience with the glory days. And we had something like 34 or 39 sunspots or something, so I held high hopes that 15 metres would deliver today. Well, it didn't, at least not where I was. I listened on an SDR in Adelaide, and I heard everybody, US stations in California, the Queensland net controller for TM, Terry, they were all coming in strength 9 into Adelaide, not getting a thing here. But then, and I already know that, you know, that the higher band, you know, 20, 15, 10 and all that, you know, they open and close like a door opening and closing. But, oh boy, I'm noticing it more, as I said, because I'm stuck here at home. I've got to put up with the noise, and I think I go playing radio up at the back of a Linda, where I've got perhaps a bit of a takeoff there up there with the elevation and all that. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to relate to you, Chris, is that especially when you're in Deal Island, I believe you had one of those, what I call Pt.2 handhelds, the Chinese El Cheapo. Well, I promised myself I would never, ever indulge in one myself, and I mean with 5 Yaesu handhelds, you know, I didn't really need another toy, but I weakened during the week and actually procured one. And I tell you what, I programmed it without having to look at any instruction manuals, which is the first time ever, and it's a great little radio. I am so impressed. Hey, I don't know what it does about spurious emissions and all that, although if you read Pt.2's advertising propaganda, they say that, you know, they're good quality now, that they've fixed everything up. But I tell you, again, I can't believe how impressed I am. I think I've got to acquire another toy in a different colour. Hi. But anyway, I'm wondering if I'm preaching to the choir, because, as I said, I don't know whether you actually own the one you have. I think that you had it on a loan, but I don't remember you making any complaints about it. So I just thought I'd throw that back to you and see what your thoughts are about the Pt.2 radio. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Just leaving a gap there if anybody else wants to come in. I had no problems with Baofeng's directly. I took one of my own that was acquired from Jeff Sylvester, VK3VJS, with thanks. I got it for a very good price. 3CJ and Chris, or 47475, and wherever we be. And that allowed them to talk to people who were also on error. And that allowed them to talk to people who were also on Erith Island across the other side of a stretch of water about 2 kilometres wide called Murray Pass that runs between the two islands. The only time I've had somebody draw attention to Baofeng's negative characteristics was one of the radio inspectors tied up with the department, Steve Haynes, 3ZH, who has access to some extremely good cutting-edge measuring equipment. And according to him, if you hold the transmit button, you soon see the fundamental go down and the birdies and harmonics come up. And if you hold your finger on the transmit button for 7 minutes, you hear bang, and the thing ceases to work. The PAs are subject to overheating. They're running very close to the edge of their specs, apparently. So they're built to a price, not a quality. But having said that, I must say they're very sensitive. They don't, the ones that the UV5Rs that I've tried have not been so subject to adjacent channel interference or cross-mod as you'd expect. And for the price, mind you, the price is next to zero, they're really rather good. Also, thank you for the comments on the D-Star conversation. I must admit, that's the closest I've come of recent months to losing my temper on the air. I am not proud of it, but when you hear two guys having just a reasonable conversation about critique of different digital systems, D-Star, Fusion, and all of those, and Randall's just said he didn't like D-Star, to have somebody come on and just go to town on him because he doesn't like a particular radio, just because you're a fan of it, indicates to me a huge sense of self-importance to butt in on a conversation like that in which you're not involved. So I just felt bounden to come up and say, this isn't your conversation, bugger off. Because possibly because Randall was too much of a gentleman to say it. Anyway, that was how that all happened, as you probably heard. And I apologised to Randall afterwards. It's not often I lose my temper on the air. My opinion is that you can laugh off people on CB because they're under the guise of anonymity. But when somebody who's adult and a licensed radio ham is prepared to jump on top of a conversation like that and take personal exception to a simple technical review, what can one say? Okay. One thing that you didn't mention, Peter, which I'll get you to do straight away, is the address of the new venue. Can you give us that, Peter? VK3ACZ, the address of the new venue for the Sherbrooke Radio Club, VK3AML.
Yes, sure can, Chris. It's number 36 Pine Crescent, Baronia, just off Dorset Road, to the west of Dorset Road. And it's the Wesleyan Methodist Church Hall that we will be meeting in for the foreseeable future. And again, touch wood or fingers crossed that it's actually going to happen and that we won't be in a further period of hardship of any kind. And just quickly, if I can make my last little comment about the business on the 10-metre repeater the other day, I thought, as I said...
Radio to avoid that very thing, or at least I did. So that disturbs me even more than people swearing on the air, that sort of behaviour. Anyway, round to VK3CG. Thank you for giving me that 36 Pine Crescent, Baronia, for the next meeting of the Sherbrooke Radio Club, Wesleyan Methodist Church Hall. That means we bring no dance music up, obviously. Oh, shouldn't say things like that. And if they have the meeting at 7th of June, it'll be 7:30 p.m. Okay, and to look for the 3KID website, just repeating this for the stream as well as the...
And standing underneath a repeater on a hilltop may not be the best place to operate the radio from. But apart from that, they were very sensitive and you know, yes, there were spurious emissions at various points, but I wasn't aware that they significantly changed. But I suppose if your output devices are overheating, that's going to have some very interesting effects on sort of harmonics and things like that. But there we are. Yep. So it was interesting. Yes, I saw your bit of the video of the island and so on, and that I think Steve must have put up, and saw Henry there. I think I did give Steve and Henry a few bits of radio equipment years and years ago. I think Henry, I gave him one of my... I had a Trio R1, the little R1000, and when he was starting to get interested as a youngster, I sort of lent it to him, and then I said, "No, you just keep it." And hopefully that helped a little bit on his little journey in the radio sphere. Anyway, I won't hold it too much longer now, but I'll pass it back to you, Chris. And as I said, I don't really think we'll be meeting in clubs for the next couple of weeks at least.
But, I like my soft bed. Particularly, I like having a shower in the morning and a good place to sit down and have a good crap. Doing it in the bush has bells on it. It's, Steve enjoys the remote experience. So did Dave Stewart, particularly, is a minimalist camper, and he was able to get by just with a weatherproof sleeping bag on the ground, no tent. I borrowed a tent from Steve's family to stay in, and Steve was particularly good on working out how much each of us could eat and drink each day, remembering that we had to take in our own drinking water in 2 big 40-litre containers, jerry cans, which we set in the dunes just above high tide level on the beach. So we had to go down there each morning with a flexible container, kind of a bladder, fill that up and bring it up to the campsite about 100 yards up the hill from the beach. It was quite an experience, actually. It's I've only edited one of the 2 videos I intend for the trip. The first video covers the trip in on the boat and a little of where we were camping, but doesn't really go into the history of the settlement there, which is fascinating. A house virtually untouched from the 1840s in reasonably good condition, stone house, which would at the time have been a very large homestead, because the first lighthouse keeper had 12 children living on an island like that in 1848. Can you imagine it? Anyway, it was a fascinating place to visit, quite apart from being an interesting place to do light beam transmissions from. We also set up a VHF station on a high spot and operated a lot with that on the Sunday morning and also on the Monday. And we used HF on only one night. And on that night, Pt.2 came through. Being in the middle of Bass Strait with the sea all round, it was an ideal HF location. No noise at all. There were no lightning storms within Kui, and when we switched on the 80-metre transmitter and put the antenna on it, we thought the RF front end had gone dead until we heard signals from Melbourne on 5 watts with just bulk signal to noise. It was phenomenal. Something we're not used to. Makes me think I probably should go, just as a de-expedition, to the north end of King Island at the other end of Bass Strait and give it a try from there. And when I get the Annan, that'll be very possible. Incidentally, Mr. Egg, I'm going to invest in a fully software-defined radio, which will probably obsolete most of the rest of the shack. I'll be able to vary the bandwidth of what I transmit at the touch of a mouse key on a screen.
Behaviour, and fine if you're going to make it structured, but otherwise there's not really much time for that. Anyway, I haven't really got much to say on this over, so I'll put it over then.
Okay. Round to Peter, VK3ACZ. Just wondering if there's anything more for me to comment on, but I think I've covered it all pretty well.
About it, and it went in one ear and out the other. Sorry about that, Chris. But anyway, I thought that you were going to be speaking at the next meeting, whenever that was, so I've probably got that wrong as well. Well, you'll know if you've been given the tap on the shoulder. Regardless of when it is, I'm looking forward to it. And your little talk that is about Deal Island, because I kind of feel like I was there being on the 80-metre broadcast, and that was pretty good. That was a very entertaining night of HF work. Getting Trevor there to be the net controller for it all, because you were there in the dark without a pen and paper and all that, and listening to Peter Parker going down to, what was it, 8 milliwatts or something like that before he started to get hard to hear. Tests I've done thus far, it's come up a pretty workable and sensitive radio. Plus, as I said before, the only handheld I've been able to program without looking at a manual. It was all just intuitive off the screen, and I'm very grateful for that. Mind you, I still need a chirp program to put the channel names in. I've only got channel numbers and frequencies in it. But anyway, enough of all that. I hope David's still there. So if he said before he was planning to go, if he's not there, we'll catch him next time. But anyway, back to you, Chris, VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Well, as the witching hour has come, I'll just check whether Dave's still there. 3CG, are you still with us to say cheers, or have you moved on? VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3CG, yes, I'm still here, but I will make a move now. So, similar to everyone, great to chat to you and listen again, and it was a fascinating evening. I'm not going to make every single one of them, but when I'm around and things like that, it's always nice to have a listen, and fascinated to get some of the most really interesting historical recordings, which I certainly enjoy a great deal. And it was nice to catch up with Steve earlier in the week as well, and that you've now got Ken Murray on the Facebook. So that'll be interesting too. He certainly has some really
Mr. Egg to see if he has any final words, and then we'll tie the ribbons. VK3GG and the group VK3AML.
Yes, 3AML, VK3EGG. Yeah, okay, well, cheers there, Dave. Yeah, that was the other comment I was going to make. Well, things like wax-ons and whatever I have there, but basically, my main thing of the hobby has always been having things that you can't buy, homebrew things and modified commercial things and whatever, designed to do what I want to do, and modified commercial things and whatever, designed to do what I want to do. So all those sorts of repeater link things I only really used and as talkback things and to call Anthony and whatever, and they're just additions to what I would normally do as a sort of a talkback link. They're not my main hobby. I think having a hobby restricted to just repeaters of things would be quite restrictive. Although I suppose if you're in an old people's home, there was this guy I used to talk to on the air in the 90s. I think he's not with us anymore. And
in August 1927, of a man named Lawrence Campbell. The name didn't immediately mean anything to me. Anyway, I picked it up purely because it was an Australian recording of somebody reciting an elocutionary piece and thought no more of it. After that, I was reading a book on C.J. Dennis, the author who wrote The Sentimental Bloke. And sure enough, the person who, during the First War, became well known as a reciter on the stage, Tivoli and elsewhere, of C.J. Dennis's work, including reciting from memory the entire Sentimental Bloke, the whole 100 pages, I believe he committed to memory, was Lawrence Campbell. And this turns out to be one of 3 surviving recordings of him, so I'm very glad to have it. Lawrence Campbell reading a poem called With Eliza, which he wrote himself. Recorded in Sydney, 1927.
I've held them little feel of sorta mellow and as happy as can be, and anything and everything is good enough for me. I don't care what the bill is, it's a sheer delight to pay, while me head it is a whirling in a most peculiar way, and the earth it seems a lifting, and the earth it seems a lifting, and the heavens seem to reel, and in meadow or in wood, that minds me of Eliza. I'm no ways pious, yet I thank the Lord that made her. He done good work, you bet. But my hinges have grown rusty, and I've most forgot to kneel. But when I'm with Eliza, well, that's just the way I feel.
Lawrence Campbell.
That's just the way I feel.
Lawrence Campbell, Sydney-based elocutionist, well known on stage during the First World War for his recitations of C.J. Dennis's verse. and we have that recording of his actual voice. Corny though it now sounds, you're listening to delivery, which was common in the 19th century. This is VK3AML, just rounding out the Saturday night transmission. One recording that I have been requested to play as a result of the interviews with the colleagues of the Polar. Here is Sir Ernest Shackleton, recorded March 30th, 1910. And we'll do that take 2. I forgot to put the level up, wouldn't I? VK3AML. This is Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Main results of the British Antarctic expedition of 1907 under my command are as follows. We reached a point within 97 geographical miles of the South Pole. The only thing that stopped us from reaching the actual point was the lack of 50 pounds of food. Another party reached for the first time the South Magnetic Pole. Another party reached the summit of a great active volcano, Mount Erebus. We made many interesting geological and scientific discoveries and had many narrow escapes throughout the whole time. A typical narrow escape was when we were going up the great glacier towards the pole. We were marching along, 3 of us harnessed to one sledge in very bad light. Our last pony was being led by another man with 500 pounds of stores. All of a sudden, we heard a shout of help from the man behind. We looked round and saw him supporting himself by his elbows on the edge of a chasm. There was no sign of the pony, and the sledge was jammed with its bow in the crevasse. We rushed back and helped the man out, and then hauled the sledge out. Then we lay down to have a look, but nothing but a black gulf lay below. The pony may have fallen 1,000 or 1,500 feet. Anyhow, he'd gone. What had happened was this. We, the first 3, with our weight distributed, crossed in safety, in the bad light, the bridge over an unseen chasm. The weight of the pony following, other times spending nearly half the day hauling each sledge up by means of the alpine rope. And thus we went along, and thus we returned, having done a work that has resulted in great advantage to science, and for the first time returning without the loss of a single human life. And throughout all this, I was helped by a party of men who were regardless of themselves and only thinking of the good of the expedition. I, Ernest Shackleton, have today, March the 30th, dictated this record.
All right, he says. Sir Ernest Shackleton, 30th of March 1910. A lecture on his South Polar expedition of 1908. And that was at the request of VK3ZZC, Ralph, last week. Now that it's late and most of the Mother Grundies are in bed, I suppose we can run a little bit of music, although it tends to be frowned on. A little bit doesn't hurt, and it's not actually against the letter of the law to play music anymore. It's against the letter of the law for entertainment, but this is more in the nature of historical documentary material. The orchestra of 2BL Sydney in 1927 was led by a man named Cess Morrison, and the name of the band was Cess Morrison and his Gloom Chasers. Would you believe it? God, can't they do better than that? In June 1927, the Parlophone Company wanted to start up in Sydney with their own recordings. They had no recording plant, but they managed to borrow the pre-electric horn and diaphragm direct-to-disc recording lathe that Columbia had cast out and cut the very last acoustic recording session.
Oh Marie, will you walk on the Lido with me? So I entreat you, I should like all my people to meet you. Oh Marie, and to see, and I'll take you to London with me. We'll honeymoon very soon. We'll honeymoon very soon. Oh Marie.
Got the idea initially of making pre-recorded radio programs, and Irving Mills and his charmingly named Hotsy Totsy gang cut a series of radio programs, of which this, with a vocalist composer named Hoagie Carmichael that some may have heard of, is one of their few surviving programs. 1929.
Music that blends with every mood, with every whim, is brought into homes the world over through the medium of the Brunswick radio, the Brunswick Tanatrope, the Brunswick Tanatrope with radio, and the Brunswick electrical record. And so the strains of that beautiful melody, Say It With Music, introduces radio's outstanding feature, Brunswick Brevities. And now relax. It'll be your last chance, for tonight you're going to be entertained, nay more. If he
me introduce you to the only living double-voiced pianist, and a dizzy ivory beater at that, Mr. Hoagie Carmichael. When you hear him work, you'll think he's a duet, but don't let him deceive you when he does our next number. It's Harvey.
He sure is a neat fellow. We dearly love Harvey. He's our pride and joy.
Well, if you could see how we act when the people turn their back, always tight in a fight, just trapped out all night.
For the last 3 hours, you've been listening to VK3AML with a regular Saturday night procession of material, I suppose you'd call it. We do this carrying on a tradition that was established by the late Tony Sanderson, who was my predecessor with the VK3AML call sign, who first went to air in 1966 and sort of refined this as a concept in the 1970s. The tradition was carried on as a Saturday night tradition by Dave, VK3 Alpha Sierra Echo, Dave Stewart, and now he seems to have vacated the position and left it to me. So as a means of getting a conversation going on a Saturday night, giving ham radio people something to listen to, occupying frequencies that would otherwise not be occupied at all, I decided to carry it on, particularly during the COVID pandemic when people are caught inside and I have a captive audience. Anyway, next week, next Saturday, I hope to have a more reliable video stream up on internet. The current video stream is highly unreliable, seems to vary in quality and in interruption from minute to minute. And apologies to those who are watching and saw the restart of the stream when it completely froze at about just before 11 o'clock. We hope that by the inclusion of OBS software between the webcam and YouTube Live that we might be able to get a more continuous stream going. And hello to Terry Sims, who's just woken up. You seem to wake at the oddest hours, Terry. So without further ado, this is VK3AML. Saying good evening, and we'll catch you back 9:30 p.m. next Saturday night. All the best. And to the people on the stream, thank you for persisting. I hope to have something a bit more reliable next week. There's somebody still there.
Not sure what's going on there, Chris. It's the point carrier. VK3AML, VK3FPJ.